everyone. I'm Sheila. Welcome back to The Truth About Death and Dying. And today we're welcoming back Meg Hegemann. Hi, Meg.
Hello.
Welcome back. I'm not going to go through the big spiel of who you are. They're going to have to watch the previous podcast to get all your deets.
Good.
Um, but you have a great um, vat of experience and knowledge about all kinds of things, but death and dying and all that process. You were a pastor.
I was, yes.
And we take these experiences and we just move through life and we, utilize those or enlighten other people when we need to, I think, when
Yeah,
the
it was
situation comes
helpful
up.
to be with other people. It helped inform my own experience then to be with my own parents. So, yeah.
Yeah. So today, what we're going to talk about, in fact, on the last one, we'll start with this and then we'll move on to the topic of the day. But I mean, this is kind of the topic of the day too. But I meant to ask you this on the last podcast, and we just got talking about other things, and it's no worries. But did you find that there were common concerns or fears for the folks that you served and or were caring for, or part of the process of when they were at the end of their life? And did you come across? I feel like there's got to be common fears and
There,
concerns.
yeah, there are. I would say by far the most common thing is that people are concerned about suffering. Nobody wants to suffer.
Nobody wants to suffer.
Right, and so that's certainly the overwhelming piece. D- I find that it depends a lot on people's faith backgrounds, um, and really just on a very personal level, whether they have fear of death itself or not. Um, we've talked in the last one a little bit about our faith backgrounds in the Methodist tradition, and I've found that that has a huge impact on how people approach their comfort with the end of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Whether people who come from a background that um, emphasizes the need for repentance. I mean, most faith traditions will say we need to course correct, while we
Right.
go along. But those that emphasize sort of God's retribution have much more fear, I think, than those who focus more on God's grace and
Yeah.
on and so that has just an enormous impact. And so my father, for one, was raised in the Catholic Church, and then when he married my mother, he switched and became Methodist. And um,
Do they call those
toward the
recovering
end,
Catholics? Isn't that what they call
yeah, yeah, there's a fair number of those. But it was interesting that toward the very end, he seemed to be lapsing back because he'd always talked about how he was definitely not afraid of death. He, firmly believed in the grace of God and and he would talk about, he read scripture actually for, um, my niece knew that he would not survive to her wedding, and she had him record
Oh,
him reading scripture. Um, and so he loved doing that. And when he was planning his mother's funeral, it was all about verses that nothing separates us from the love of God in Christ. And there is no East or West, Jew or Greek, like, you know, all grace, all encompassing, you know.
yeah.
And toward the very, very end of his life, he started using some words that we hadn't heard him use in a long time. Um, and that was kind of a surprise. He was still holding on to, like, he still didn't have fear particularly,
Mm-hmm.
but but there was definitely a concern of like, um, more for other people, that like,
Yeah.
I hope they're all gonna kind of
Are
get
have
right.
their souls been saved?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. My dad had a bit of that himself too. Like he wanted to be sure that your soul was in good standing with God before,
yeah, and that was just kind of unusual for him because he knew we all were. Yeah, I don't know. So
Yeah.
that was just kind of funny. I've
Yeah.
definitely had people who were terrified.
Yeah, I
Um,
bet.
yeah, yeah,
And you can't stop it,
yeah.
but and it's funny because I was just telling a friend of mine the other day. We were talking about, I don't know what, anything, doesn't matter, spiritual stuff. But I said I remembered being a young kid in church. I was probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8, and sitting in the Methodist church. I have a clear remembrance of this, and I don't know what the minister was talking about, but I just remember thinking, like, I don't want to, like, I was like, I think it was like, I don't want to be buried in the ground where worms and things are gonna, like, I didn't like that idea.
Hmm.
But then I was like, because I think, at 7 or 8 years old, you're not really thinking like, well, it's just your body that's there. It's not your soul. But it was
Yeah,
at that point where I was like, wait a second. I'm like, this thing that makes me me, my personality, my spirit, whatever you want to call it, it can't die. It just can't. There can't just be an end to what makes me me. And at 7 or 8 years old, I knew this. And I was like,
interesting.
okay, like then it was like, oh, I just don't know how I'm gonna die. Like that was what
Right.
became my
Yeah,
fear was not if I wasn't worried about the after fact. Like
yeah.
it was how I was gonna be getting out of this life. So, and as I've gotten older and I think more spiritual, I care even less. I just, I mean, I always kind of hope it's quick
Right.
because
Oh yeah.
again, no one wants to suffer.
Right.
But if I have an end like my father, he had one of the best deaths. That's what they talk about in doula training is, you
Yep.
know, allowing people the best death that they can have. And it might sound ridiculous to people, but it's a real thing. And if you can make it happen, my dad was in no pain. He was
Yep.
surrounded by people he loved. He was at home. I don't know how much better you can get. You're going to die.
Absolutely.
You can't change that piece of it. You can't change it. So try to make the best of what you've got and make it as comfortable as you can. So, but yeah, so it's interesting because I feel glad about that, and I don't know how much of it's really like a God thing or spiritual thing, but just I just knew I'm like, there's just no way. There's no way that you can kill this spirit. you know, you're not gonna do it. You're not taking me down.
You're
But
a pretty strong spirit, Sheila, so I would
I,
I would probably agree with that one. I'm not going to keep that one down.
I'm not going down without a fight. But anyway, so uh, let's talk about family dynamics
Mm.
because everyone's got families and they all got different dynamics and how you
Yep.
handle things. And so you're the youngest of six.
Youngest of six. Yeah.
Youngest of six. God, I'm the youngest of three. I had two older brothers. That was enough for me. I can't
Yeah.
imagine being five more ahead of me.
Well, we always, I would joke that, out of six of us, you got to have a couple good and a couple bad. You got plenty, so you can kind of give and take.
Yeah. I always tell everyone, I'm like, well, my parents had two boys and then they got me and went, oh no, we got perfection now. We're done. We're going to stop
There you
right
go.
here.
There you go.
So, so both your parents are dead. They both
Yeah.
died. Your mom
Yeah.
had dementia, and your dad had COPD.
COPD.
Okay,
He
and
had,
so were you part of the care team and when they were dying?
yes. Yeah. So, and I think, what we were just talking about in terms of people's differences in terms of concerns and fears carries through to this conversation as well, right? So, six kids. Um, we were all raised in the Methodist Church, and yet, even within that, people just have different relationships with death, right? Um, and and then one sibling has since uh, gone to Catholicism. I don't know whether to say gone back because my father was raised in that and then left it, and
Yeah.
then Anyway, so one sibling married a woman who's Catholic, and he converted, and
So he went
um,
back. He
he
went
did.
back to your dad's religion. He went the other way.
Yeah, which gave him a lot in common with the rest of Dad's family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the extended family was all still Catholic. So yeah, and there were aspects of that that didn't really occur to any of the rest of us until Dad's death, and talk of cremation and those kinds of things came up. So, um,
So
so
no,
yeah,
are you were you raised in the county? And for those
yes,
of you who might be watching outside of Maine, the county is a rustic county, and it's like I think the biggest county in the state of Maine, right? It's humongous.
it's the biggest
But
county east of the Mississippi.
oh, well,
Yes,
that's a good
we
claim to
are.
fame right there.
That's
And
right.
it's
That's
it's
exactly right.
northern Maine for those of you who are not familiar. And so that's where you were born and raised in the county.
It is. Yeah, we are. The county is bordered on three sides by Canada, so we are not coastal Maine by any stretch. In fact, probably the fastest way to the coast is to go through Canada. Um, so, yeah,
It's really sad since Maine is on the coast, but
I
you got to
know.
go through Canada to.
We don't, we don't eat lobsters. We grow potatoes.
There you
So,
go. Right. And you grow them hardy up there. So do all your siblings still live in the county, or did they?
so um, at the moment, and this was true at the time of their death, so three of us were here and three were away. I was gone for about 20 years, but in 2016 I moved back because I knew that if I was going to get good time with mom and dad, I needed to do that sooner rather than
Mhm.
later.
Yeah.
And so my two oldest brothers had stayed here forever, and then I had one sibling who'd moved out to the West Coast. One sibling is in coastal Maine. Was in Bangor. He's in kind of near Ellsworth now. And then I have a sister who was in Ohio, but she, and I'm pretty sure this was true even when Dad passed away, she had retired, and so she had a flexible schedule. So even though she didn't live here permanently, she was able to come home for like a month or 6 weeks and provide care during that time and then go back home. So she was a critical part of the care team as well.
And did you feel that you had? Was there any tension in your family with like caring for your parents?
Yeah, so it was a very different experience between the two. Um, when when Dad was sick, um, so first of all, Mom was the one with dementia, and we didn't realize kind of how bad it was until Dad started getting sick because he covered for her. Right? He was he had physical health challenges. She was fine physically but was fading mentally. So she would drive the car because he had neuropathy in his feet, but
Mm-hmm.
he had to tell her when to turn, where to turn, how to get from A to B, right? So it was the two of them together that were able to maneuver through life. And
Codependent at its finest.
yeah, kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so when his health was failing more and more, then it became clearer that he'd been the one kind of making all of the decisions and kind of covering for her um, declining mental capacity. So we were learning things all along the way, right? And because there are six of us, we would know and hear different things, right? So, I talk to Dad, he says this thing. My brother talks to Dad, he says this other thing. We're both convinced that what Dad told us is the true, right, and only
Right.
truth. right? And they're different things. So that became pretty clear. And we had all, as a family, our whole lives, mom was the linchpin, right? Um, like we all called mom, and mom would give us the news on all the other siblings. So, like, I wouldn't call my brother on the West Coast,
Right.
like ever, right? And so we essentially ended up with no relationship. So we both just depended on mom to tell us
Yeah.
the other person's news. Um, and mom, so one of the things that we had to adapt when dad got sick was that we couldn't do that anymore. We had to start communicating directly with each other, which was hard because after decades of not really communicating with each other very well, we weren't really good at it. So we had to develop that skill. And when dad, when it got to the very end of his life, um, that's, we were all very much together at that point. Like, we valued the gifts that each person had to bring to that care team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my sister provided the bulk of the physical care. So when she could come home and spend, a month, she was just providing for a lot of the physical and the gross stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of life.
Yep.
The brother on the West Coast is our comic relief, and so he could come home, and we were kind of exhausted, and so when either of the two brothers who live away, when they would come home, it was kind of like, I'm out of here, have a good time, because we're going to
Yeah.
go sleep and see our own families and, whatever.
Yep. I hear that.
And that, like, they came to very much appreciate the level of work, mentally and physically, that it took.
Yeah.
So there was not, at least I don't remember, and I could be romanticizing this a bit from nostalgia, but there was not a lot of headbutting when it came to
That's
dad
good.
care.
That's amazing, actually. With six of you, that's really
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, we made up for it with mom. um, and I think that's the other component of it was because
Excuse me.
we at that point we needed to care for both of them, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
dad needed care. Mom wanted to be providing some of the care, but because of her dementia, it could get worse
Oh.
rather than better. So
Yeah.
so we had to tag team and provide different types of care for each of them. And
That's exhausting.
it was it was exhausting. But in some ways it also enabled all of us to have a role, right? So
Yep.
so those who were really not um, that were grossed out more easily, for lack of
Mm-hmm.
a better way to say it, right?
Yep.
Take mom to the grocery store, right? Take mom to lunch. Do something with her so that she can, or just sit and make her a cup of tea, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do something to value her, because she would be a little bit jealous of dad getting all the attention.
Of course. Yeah.
So, and so we needed to provide that as well. So there were more opportunities, I think, for each
Mm-hmm.
person to do
Lend
what
a
they-
hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it does make you, you want to be helpful. I mean, I think most people do. If you have a decent relationship with your parents, or whoever you're caregiving for, to do your part too. And I was the primary caregiver for my dad. I lived with him just because of my circumstances. Really allowed me to do that. And but my brothers gave me respite, and it was good. And we had a good, system down. But it's a lot. It's a lot. So with your mother, so you got along pretty well with your dad, and then now it's your mom's time. Because what I'd
Right.
like to know is if you had conflicts, like if you can speak to anything specific, and if so, how did you resolve them, or did you not resolve them, or how?
Yeah.
That's a loaded
So,
question.
yeah, um, there's a lot of answer. Um, so when dad, so the end of dad's life, that was also during COVID, right? And so we also
Yeah,
had to spell each other because, oh, now this family's been exposed or sick, so this family comes in, and all that kind of stuff. So when dad was gone, um, then and dad, we were able to care for him at home, which we were pretty adamant because we'd had friends whose parents had to go to the hospital and then they were not able to be with them during COVID.
yeah,
And we
that
did not
that
want that, largely for mom. We're like,
yeah.
that is not going to be helpful for her. So we were able to keep him at home. Um, for mom's dementia, the one of the things that I learned through some of the support that we got through the Agency on Aging and some other training was if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. It is
Yeah.
very different from person to person. And in her case, um, she lost some physical abilities even before she lost some mental capacity. I'm not sure how to say this without being very indelicate, but she forgot how certain bodily functions worked,
Okay.
and um, that part of her brain was affected. So what it did, it created a situation in which what she really needed was 24-hour care before most people realized she needed 24-hour care.
Okay.
Um, because without it, you could walk into a literal storm
Mm-hmm.
when you walked into the house. So, what couple of things happened in terms of family dynamics. Some of us uh, want to learn everything there is to learn about whatever it is that's going on, right?
Right.
So my sister and I took the Savvy Caregiver class, and we talked to everyone we knew who'd had a loved one with dementia, and we looked for all the resources to figure out what tools, what approaches, right? And so we learned things like stop correcting her, just go with it, in terms of having conversations. And so I do some theater work, so I was all about the yes, and what did that three-legged person have to tell you about Christmas? Like whatever randomness was
Right.
coming up about. And there are others in our family who honestly, like my dad, because at the end of dad's life, he was trying to adjust to her dementia as well, and he couldn't. He was constantly correcting. I've already told, what did I just tell you, Nancy? You're like,
No.
stop being a jerk. Well, some of my siblings had that approach. Like, they would think that she was being manipulative or um, and so they would think that if she gave us two different answers, it was because she was trying to manipulate us, not because
She couldn't
she could
remember.
remember.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh.
So I would say a big piece of the family dynamics that came into play were different understandings of dementia, different willingness to learn about what could be helpful or harmful techniques in dealing with it, and how much care was required. So, and kind of also how much planning to go into it.
Yeah.
You know, um, so some of us were thinking she could live another 20 years. And this takes a lot of work. And I was still employed at the beginning of this, and it was like, I mean, yes, I can stay overnight 3 nights a week or whatever the case might be. We had some schedules, and that's okay for now, but I can't do this for 20 years. I
Right.
like
No, yeah. You gotta know your own limitations and
yeah. And so there were some one in particular who just thought he was going to be the savior. He was going to provide all the care she needed for as long as she needed, right there in her home all by himself.
wow.
And that was
How long did
not
that last?
well. That's where some of the rub came in, right?
Yeah.
Because I honestly think that he thought that that level of care was sufficient. And all of the rest of us are like, that's not sufficient. Like, it's not sufficient for her because we can see the house and we can see her, and it's not sufficient for you. Like, you
Right.
need your own, you have your family, you have, So that was by far the biggest source of tension. So we were looking for a team of people that could gather around to provide the necessary support at home, and we're trying to plan, because here you can't just get into a memory care unit. There's only two, and it can take years to get in. So we immediately got on waiting list because it could be 3 years. And he was
Right.
very, very resistant. He did not in any way, shape, or form want to, put her in a home when we weren't in any way talking now. We were planning ahead. So there was a huge butting of heads, and honestly, no, it never got resolved. And when Mom passed, was very, very different than when Dad passed. We were not all, it was kind of like, we're all leaving so you can come over now to say your
Oh wow.
goodbyes. It was horrible.
Oh.
Yeah.
How when did your dad die?
Dad was in, I wrote this down because I never remember, 2021, which makes sense because it was during COVID. So it was March of 2021.
My dad died in November of 2021. So we were kind of in that COVID time frame also. Not he didn't spend any time in the hospital because he didn't when he got his terminal diagnosis, he just said, "Nope, I'm not doing any treatment. I'm just going to when the good Lord's ready to take me, I'm ready to go." So,
Yeah.
and he lived another 18 months so after his 6-month diagnosis. But he died at the end of November, the 1st of November in 2021. So, and then so when did your mom die?
November of 2023.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's,
So I reached a point where I was going to change my employment. So I was kind of spinning off to create my own consulting business. And the first 5 months of that turned out I wasn't doing any consulting, because that's when we became aware of the inadequate level of care Mom was getting. Like, there were people in the community that were reaching out and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you with her because it's not been going well." Like,
oh
really,
boy.
tell me more. Um, so at that point, once I had left my job there, then I was basically full-time care for Mom with a team of people, because so then, yeah, by the time we were done, we had a team of like 5 retired nurses or CNAs who came and took shifts.
And that's not cheap either. I mean, it's an expensive thing to get help in your house and to keep her
It is.
because I assume she died at home.
She did. We were able to, yep, we were able to keep her there and do that. We were very fortunate that we qualified for some level of state assistance
Okay.
that that enabled us to pay for some of that care, and then her funds paid for,
Yeah.
you know.
And honestly, like if you can keep them at home and not like, I mean, I will, do everything in my power to keep anyone I love out of a nursing home if possible. Sometimes you can't help it, but they're just
Right.
the ideal for me would be to go at home if I had the choice, and I'm sure, you know,
Yeah.
that's
I
everyone's. I think like a dream death would be, oh, I just went in my sleep peacefully at home,
exactly.
boop
Yeah.
a doop. So,
Yeah.
and some people are lucky enough to do, go that way, but or on vacation in my sleep somewhere tropical would be all right too. I think
Yeah. I'd be
in
okay
a
with that.
hammock on a beach. Just saying, but
Yeah.
so that's good that you were able to keep her home and
It was, and it
and not
was
in a nursing home.
really good. Some of the folks that we had helping us take care of her were amazing because they had been through it many times with other people. And so they could say, they had a much better idea of what to expect when, right?
Yeah,
Um, what level of care was reasonable and when we were potentially doing too much, right? Like we were able to feed her. I mean, I would just, and it wasn't that she couldn't physically feed herself. She couldn't remember how, right? So she'd look at a sandwich and she'd take it all apart and start picking because she couldn't remember that you eat it together.
pick it up and eat it. Yeah,
And if I put the food on her fork, then she would pick it up and stick it in her mouth. But it was that kind of prompting stuff,
yeah,
right? And because some of these women had worked in hospitals or nursing homes before, they would say like that she would not be getting that level of care if she, because they can't, right?
okay,
They've got lots of
yeah,
patients and they can't give that kind of individualized care. And
right,
at some point, when when it was taking a lot of time and a lot of energy, then they would kind of gently start asking questions like, to what end?
yeah,
How, yep, you're prolonging her life.
yeah,
How, I mean, they would never say it as the cost benefit analysis, but at some
right,
point we're just very gentle and respectful about saying, you know, what are, what are, what's everybody getting out of this right now?
yeah.
Um,
What's the
which
quality?
was helpful too.
Excuse me, the quality, and
Yeah.
and and not and stopping food and water is like a really hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And like in my dad's case, he was just kind of unconscious. There was no need to feed him, like at the end.
Right.
But I know that other people, were still. My aunt, when she was down, she was like, I don't want. She refused food. She refused food. She wanted to
Yeah.
die, and and it was really hard on my cousins because no one wants to watch someone starve to death.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's really hard to shift your gears and think, no, this is the part of the dying process. Is that
Yeah.
we have to stop. And so is that what happened with your mom? Is that
Yeah, I mean, and definitely she got to the point where she wasn't eating anything
and she
or
probably forgot how to swallow. I mean, you probably can even forget to know how to swallow food.
yeah. She yeah, she didn't have issues with choking or aspirating. Um, the other piece that in terms of family dynamics, everybody got there, but it was kind of staggered in terms of when we got to
Hmm.
this point. You know, there's there are things that you can do to live a healthier life, right? You
Hmm.
eat healthier food and you
Right.
exercise. And there are things you can do to improve your mental capacity. You can play games and you can do puzzles and you can read out loud. And so for some period of time, we were encouraging mom to do those things. And at different times, as siblings, we would reach this point of saying, this isn't getting better. Let her
Yeah.
eat all the ice cream she wants to eat,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? but we would get there at different times. So one person would still be trying to feed, broccoli and carrots and, apples. And others are like, you want another milkshake?
Yeah, here's a gallon of Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah. And so there were some hard feelings at different times of that. Here's this exercise bike or practice
Yeah.
this, and others are like, give her a break. She's like, so that was a challenging dynamic until the very
Yeah.
end when she couldn't get out
And
of bed.
I think getting I think in my dynamics, I think one of my brothers it's still in denial that this was gonna kill my dad. You know what I mean? Like I think he was
Yes.
still hoping for a miracle at the end, and so it can be challenging when you're like, here it is. This is the facts. We
Right.
got to accept it, and then meet dad where he is, and go from there. But on the same token, you also want to respect that your sibling or whoever other family member or is not there yet,
Right.
and show them a bit of kindness and patience. And so it's a lot of plate spinning, so to speak, when you're in that caregiving, whether you're the primary caregiver or you're in the wings there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of plate spinning sometimes.
There's like
kind of
5
keep that-
stages of grief, right? Theoretically.
Yeah.
I mean, and with 6 siblings, we're in at least, 8 of those.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, like
'cause-
I'm here, you're there. Yeah. And that can be difficult, but do you have any words of wisdom for people that might be in a situation that the dynamics are horrible, and there's what do you have any pearls that you can offer to try to resolve issues, or like do you have any
Yeah.
tools you can think of? I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot right now, but
Well, I would say there are absolutely, like, I think one of the most helpful things is an external facilitator, right?
yeah,
And so, like, agency on aging, savvy caregiver, where you can talk about things without talking directly to each other, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
if you're in
And
a
then the like
class,
doula.
talking to the teacher, right? A death doula. I'm honestly,
Yeah.
I am so, like, I've only recently learned about that as a thing, and I
Yeah.
just think there's so much need, and that's my
Oh.
hope is that that's exactly the kind of stuff that a death doula, because it's easier
Yeah.
to talk to a third party than it is face to
Yeah,
face.
it's definitely a facilitating kind of
Yeah.
gig, because it is like communicating, getting the families to communicate in a way that everyone kind of, it's is on the same page, but someone
Yeah.
might need the information coming at them this way, and someone needs it coming this way, and you got to understand how to talk to all these
Exactly.
different personalities and get them all kind of on the same page with the person that's dying and the best, and what's in their best interest.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing because ultimately it's all about communication,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I feel like that's
And some people suck at it, and some are great at it.
yeah,
And
exactly.
then you get all those other emotions, and you're tired, and you're stressed out, and you get all those other components,
Yeah.
and then you're still trying to like express your feelings to your brothers or your sisters or whoever you're dealing with, and it's not always easy, that's for sure. But communication is definitely the key if you can figure out how to do it without killing each other.
Right, right. We tried like a notebook, and that actually was probably more helpful than a lot of things. To just say
We did that too. We kind of had a communication book, and
Yep.
so whoever was on duty would just kind of write a little bit of what they noticed or saw, or a good day that Dad had, and
Yeah, one of the benefits to that was it gave us data
yeah,
because days are months long and you completely lose track of time. And
Yeah.
so, it was easy to say, oh, but she's doing better. Or, well, she's only been, had this symptom for, a couple of days. But you could go to the book and say, actually, it's been 2 weeks. And you're like,
yeah.
what?
That's.
Or
I
vice versa.
actually forgot all about our communication book that we had for my dad. But you're right, and it's good. I remember my brother made a notation. My dad had bad nausea, and so he carried his bucket with him everywhere he went. and my brother made a note, and I wish I had the book in front of me so I could read, quote it exactly. But it's kind of like my brother said he can't let go. He's having a hard time letting go of the bucket of life of And I was like, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
But he had noted that in the book that he noticed Dad's
Yeah.
need to hold on to that bucket. He just couldn't. He wanted it right there for him, and so
Yeah.
anyway. But it's a good opportunity to
Yeah.
and and people see different things and notice different things, and it's amazing how I might see something and you miss it, or vice versa. So yeah,
Yeah, that worked really well with
communication
that.
book.
I think we had
Yeah,
lots of lots of that kind of coordination that
yeah,
was really helpful.
yeah. So the other point I wanted to just jump into this while we're still chatting is the big question of, if you have young children,
Mm,
should
yeah,
you let them be a part of the dying death process and be involved with it? And your answer is,
absolutely yes.
mine is too. I
Every
agree 100% on
aspect of
that.
it. Yep.
Have you been in situations where, and I've, like in my family, I've been going to funerals my whole life, I feel like for great aunts and uncles and grandparents, and, and open caskets. And I mean, I wasn't
Yep.
ever there when someone was actively dying because we just didn't live geographically close to these family members. Excuse me. But I was a part of my parents took it, like, it was just like, oh, we're going to go to this funeral and here's a dead body. And it, it's always been a part of my life.
Yep.
But I know other people that are like, oh, I don't want to expose them to that. I'm like, well, their grandfather's not coming back. They want to have a chance to say goodbye. They
Yep.
love them too, and uh,
Yep.
so. What are your thoughts? Have you been in those situations too, and have you had to counsel families on that particular topic? And what would your advice be?
Yeah. In general, I think it's a sign of the toxic positivity that we have in our culture, and we have sort of pathologized grief, and I think that's just really unhealthy. Children, I mean, even if you think of Disney movies, right? So often a Disney movie either starts with or at some point during it has a scene where somebody dies,
Like
right?
Bambi's mom.
Bambi, right? Somebody dies.
Exactly.
I mean, like, and and if children don't learn how to process grief in those kind of safe situations, then they will be traumatized when they face it as adults. They are not going to avoid grief. They're not going to avoid losing someone they love. And if they don't learn from a young age how to grieve and the things that bring strength and comfort, you're just setting them up for a lifetime of trauma that is far more devastating than it will be if and I think, like, the younger the better. So if you go into a casket and it's an open casket, lift up your 18-month-old to see the familiar face, right? It
Hmm.
takes the fear out of death, because to that child they look like they're sleeping, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they're gone, and you can talk about how it's sad but how much you loved them and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
um, it's absolutely critical for me. And other cultures don't have this weird relationship that we do.
Yeah.
I went to Guatemala a couple of different times, and one trip was through a kind of ecotourism group where we got to stay with a family. Our bedroom was separate, but we had meals within their family home. And Mom was making the tortillas over the fire. Grandma was laid out on a cot. Grandma was dying. I never saw her move. And the grandchild was taking the soup and sitting next to Grandma on the floor and giving her a sip at a time. while she laid there. They were caring for each other,
Yeah.
right? There was no, oh my gosh, I
You're too
shouldn't.
young to do that. Excuse me.
It was, I mean, that is life, right?
Yeah.
It is the fullness of life. Um, when I've gone to cemeteries, and my parents were fabulous at this, like yours. We went to all the funerals, we went to the
Mhm.
cemeteries, and when we went to, like, when my grandmothers passed away, there were, my nieces and nephews were young, and we would just stay and hang out. They were interested in, like, oh well, and they were, at least, yeah, I think they were both cremated. But they'd, like, the kids would look down the hole, how deep is that hole and what's going to happen here, and oh, here's this box, and okay. And we'd go through the cemetery and look at all the stones and say, well, this was grandma's sister or brother, and talk about all
Mhm.
the extended family that was buried there. And and I'm convinced that they learned first that the body, kind of like the realization you had at 8 years old, right?
Yeah.
The body's just this thing. It's an
This
important thing
vessel,
because it's the one that gives us hugs, right?
right?
But it's not the same as the spirit that enlivens us.
Right.
And they learn that, okay, this is what you do. When someone dies, you gather together with everybody who loved them, and you tell stories, and you laugh, and you cry, and it's okay to do both of those. And this is where bodies go. This is what happens with them, you know? And
Yeah.
you're still kind of connected, because look, this whole extended, like, generations are all together again in this place. And isn't that kind of neat,
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
think that is all
Excuse me.
so healthy. And if they've been there for the dying piece, they've been able to say goodbye. They've
Mhm.
heard people telling stories by the deathbed. They've been part of the laughter and the tears. And then the resting place is more a peaceful ending. If you save them from all the difficulty, then it looks like they just went from being healthy to being in the
They're
ground.
dead. Yeah. They're supposed to.
Like,
Yes.
that's far more traumatic.
Yeah. I agree.
Let
I
me be
agree.
around for some of the spit and
Yeah.
the snot and the wrinkles and the, like, obviously doesn't, they don't have to be exposed to everything, but
Right.
manageable doses of that where they can visit for a while and then they can leave and you can hug them and say, that was hard, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And let them
Give them a
process.
chance to talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Open up that
yeah. I
dialogue.
really think it just makes for a much healthier
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. I agree. My granddaughter is. She's going to be 8 in the summer, and her biological father died just a couple days after my daughter found out she was pregnant. So, like, my granddaughter has just, like, death, like, kind of just, it was already about that before she even got here, right? And then when my dad died at the funeral, at the wake, um, they got there, and Emily is my daughter's name, and they saw the open casket, and we hadn't had the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
Emily and I, about it being an open casket. And so my granddaughter Coco was like a little bit like, oh, like, because I think it was the first time she'd actually seen, like a
Right.
dead body. And so Emily was just, she handled it so perfectly. So she was at her daughter's level, and this was a couple of years, back in 21. So she was a little younger then. And Emily was just eye level with her, and I dropped right down with her. And she said, we didn't know that there was going to be an open casket. And I was just explaining that this is Gigi. His body's there, but his spirit's gone. So she was a
Yeah.
matter of fact conversation. She wasn't freaking out. Coco wasn't freaking out. No one was freaking out. And then my niece and nephew, who are just a few years older than my granddaughter, we were all at the casket looking at my dad, and my niece and nephew had lost two grandfathers like within months of each other. So both their grandfathers died same year, and so they were. I said, now he's off, wherever he is, and my nephew said, yeah, he's off with Pop Pop. I'm like, yeah, Pop Pop and Gigi are together and they're having a good time, and then those kids just were running like crazy through they didn't care anymore. They were.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important. And my dad had a military, send off. They did the flag and all that, and so it was very ceremonial. But the kids were all a part of that, and they got to see all that and be with other people. And I think it's come a long way. I think with grief and children, and I did grief support facilitating for many years, and for so many years, people were just, oh, they don't know, they don't need any counseling. Well, they just lost their mom, so like my ex-husband, for instance, his mom, he was 9 years old. His mother went off to have a baby, never came home. And then, but there was no counseling for these kids, and and so it's come a long way. So that's something, but kids grieve, and they grieve different than we do, but they still want to be a part of that community of grief and grieving with the other people that love the person. So I think that is super important, but I don't know. But people are funny about it. They're so like concerned, and they want to shelter them, and they're doing the opposite. They're really providing a disservice instead of a good
setting
service
them up
for the kid.
for much more traumatic experiences
Yeah.
later. I remember my grandfather, who I was very, very close to, died when I was in 4th grade, and in that time, children were not allowed into the hospital.
Yeah.
And I'm still mad about that. Like, I was the youngest of 6, and there's like 5 years between me and the next sibling. So I just very often had this feeling that I was left out of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I just wasn't old enough. And when I was left out of that, of the opportunity to say goodbye to my grandfather, like, it still gets me teared up. It was so painful to not get to say goodbye. It just wasn't fair. And I think, that's what we rob children of if we don't let them go in and see grandma on her deathbed what I often hear is, we don't want them to remember her like that. It's not the only memory. It's not the only memory for any of us.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like,
and I think
it will be a memory, but it's not
part
the
of the
only
story.
Yes.
It's part of the story. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it's important for children to, because so much of what they learn is watching us. How do you handle the grief? Oh, okay, I see you crying, but then the next minute you're laughing and you're hugging, and you're moving through all these emotions, and they have to have something to go by. If they don't, then they're just going to be like, and so I think it is important to let them know that it is okay to cry. And it's okay to laugh.
Yes.
And it's not disrespectful to laugh at a funeral. And
Yep.
God forbid, because I don't go anywhere without laughing at some point or another. So,
Yeah. And I remember my
I think-
stepson had a hard time with that. I can't remember the funeral now, but when we were sharing a story and laughing, he did not think that was appropriate, and he might have been 11 years old or something. And we had to process later and say, like, part of me really admires that you think that's inappropriate, just in terms of like recognizing
the seriousness
that this is an important and serious event. And like, let's round that out a little bit. Not everybody has to grieve like you do.
That's
and
right.
It's also okay to share positive. So.
Yeah. I've come across people that are very serious at these funerals, and I just feel like when I go, I want people to be laughing and drinking and sharing stories and telling, I want people to laugh, do whatever, run through the gamut of emotions. But I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to get that off your chest, And I kind of, with 2 older brothers who would ridicule me if I cried, if they were torturing me. I learned to suppress those feelings. And so it's only been in the last, I don't know, probably 10 years or so that I'm going to cry in public. And if I look horrible, that's okay. So, and I know, it's hard for people to express that and so, but it's so important. It's so important to get that off your chest, and it makes you feel so much better. And, you know,
Agreed. I think the worst thing
yeah,
is when, and it's true for any emotion, right? Like anything that gets stuck is not
not
healthy.
good.
Like it
No.
all has to go through, and I totally agree, and I love your idea that like children need to see adults process through all of that so that none of it gets stuck.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. Because if you don't have someone to show you, you have to wing it. And
Yeah.
winging it isn't always the best option if you're not, and I understand sometimes people can't, they are very stoic and serious, and so they don't show any emotion. So then this is what the kid's looking at going, oh, okay, I can't cry, I can't laugh, I can't do any of these things that I'm feeling in my body right now, so, but yeah, I
Which,
think
to
it's,
circle back to our previous conversation about funerals and celebrations of life, that's one of the reasons those are important, right? Because then
yeah,
you have a community of people
yeah,
gathered together who are all in different stages and all grieving differently, and children get to see more than one example.
person, right, and how they do it, yeah. And and one other thing I like to touch on that same subject of funerals or celebrations of life or whatever you want to call it, I've found that anytime someone has died and they were like, oh, they didn't want any service, it bothered every person I talked to. Like they were like, oh yeah, like they didn't want a celebration, and I'm like, well then have one, hold one yourself. You can have a party in your backyard and call it a celebration of life. It doesn't have to be anything formal.
Right.
And but I've never had anyone go, oh, they didn't want anything, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Like no, because we want to gather as people that love this person and hug each other and cry and laugh and tell stories and keep them. You got to keep them alive by talking about it. So
Yeah. And I don't think there's a single culture that I'm aware of anyway where you don't do something.
yeah,
Like
that bothers me.
it would
It
be
bothers me so much.
it seems like a fundamental human need,
Yeah,
to gather
yeah,
in times of grief and celebration. And this is
yeah,
both. So why wouldn't you?
yeah. And I think, for some people, and I think I brought this up in an earlier podcast too, was that I think a lot of times the person that is like near death, they either don't want to put that burden of cost or planning on their family, but also I think there's a little piece of them that thinks no one's going to come. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like some people are like, like, oh, no one would come to my funeral, Well, who cares? There'll be a few people
Interesting.
there. I mean, if one person, they'll probably go.
Right.
Even if they didn't like you that much, they'll probably still go. But I don't know. I just find it so sad that people just don't want to. I don't know. It's very strange to me when people are like, I don't want to have anything. I think it's very
Yeah.
selfish to do that to your family and your friends, to put that out there in the universe. But
Which is a change, I think, of the frame, because like you say, I think um, most people are thinking they're saving others from whether it's cost or grief or whatever, and I love your reframe that it's actually very selfish,
I
because
think it is. Yeah.
you're asking people to uphold something that is not meeting their own needs, and that's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it is.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I think that is wonderful. We'll wrap it up there for today. Thank you, Meg, so much for coming on, and I'm gonna beg you to come back on again and again and again. I'm pretty darn sure. So, um,
Well, I'm
but thank
honored.
you.
I really love that you do this, Sheila. It's
Well,
really
I hope it's helping out there. I hope the information is getting out. I'd like to be a resource for people, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to put your email address out there if
Sure.
people want to reach out to you, because you're a great resource and you do workshops, and so I'd like to be able to provide your information if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
People can
Thank you.
contact me anytime. I love talking.
Awesome. Me
And
too.
I think this is a really important topic. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Meg, and thank you for everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.